The auditorium buzzed with restless energy, a sea of faces lit by the glow of phone screens. Laughter rippled through the crowd as the announcer read the next contestant's name. Elliot Hawthorne, age 88. An old man, bent like a willow under the weight of years, shuffled onto the stage, his cane tapping softly against the polished wood. Elliot's suit was threadbare, the cuffs frayed, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. The judges, a trio of polished celebrities, exchanged smirks. One leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Hawthorne, are you sure you're in the right place? This is a talent show, not a retirement home recital." The audience roared with laughter, a cruel wave that crashed over Elliot's frail frame. He didn't flinch. Instead, he offered a small, knowing smile, as if he'd heard it all before. He eased himself onto the piano bench, the instrument gleaming under the spotlight like a relic from another era. The crowd's jeers faded into a murmur as his fingers, gnarled and trembling, hovered over the keys. Then, with a single, deliberate note, the world changed. A melody unfurled, rich and haunting, like a river carving through stone. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, but played with a soul that seemed to pull the stars from the sky. Each note carried a lifetime grief, joy, love, loss woven into a tapestry of sound that silenced the room. Elliot's hands moved with a grace that belied his age, his fingers dancing across the keys as if they were extensions of his heart. The judges' smirks vanished. The audience, once mocking, sat transfixed, some leaning forward, others clutching their neighbors' hands. A young woman in the front row wiped a tear from her cheek, her phone forgotten on her lap. The music swelled, a crescendo of longing that seemed to plead with the universe itself, and when the final note lingered in the air, the silence was deafening. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause erupted. The crowd leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, some shouting his name. The judges, red-faced and stammering, offered apologies disguised as praise. Elliot rose slowly, his cane steadying him, and gave a humble nod. He didn't need their validation. He'd come for something greater. Elliot Hawthorne had not always been a pianist. In his youth, he'd been a dreamer, a boy with a head full of music but hands bound by poverty. Growing up in a small, dust-choked town, he'd sneak into the local church after hours, where an old, upright piano stood in the corner. Its keys were chipped, its sound tinny, but to Elliot, it was a portal to another world. He taught himself to play by ear, mimicking hymns he'd heard on Sundays, weaving them into melodies of his own. By 16, he was composing, scribbling notes on scraps of paper he hid under his mattress. But life had other plans. The war came, and Elliot was drafted. The piano fell silent as he traded sheet music for a rifle, his dreams buried under the weight of survival. He returned home a different man, his left hand scarred from shrapnel, his heart scarred by loss. Music became a memory, something he locked away as he built a life marriage, a daughter, a steady job at the factory. Yet, in the quiet of the night, he'd hum his old compositions, the notes still alive in his bones. Decades passed. His wife, Clara, died young, leaving him to raise their daughter, Lily, alone. Lily was his light, a girl with her mother's laugh and her father's love for music. She'd beg him to play, and sometimes, when the world was kind, he'd sit at the second-hand piano in their cramped living room and let the music flow. But life was rarely kind. The factory closed, money dwindled, and the piano was sold to pay bills. Lily grew up, moved away, and Elliot's world grew smaller, quieter. Now, at 88, he lived in a one-room apartment, his only companions a worn radio and memories. The talent show had been a whim, a flyer spotted at the community center where he played cards with other retirees. "Show the world your gift," it read. Something stirred in him, a spark he thought had died long ago. He'd entered on a dare to himself, not for fame, but to prove he still had something to say. Backstage, as the applause still echoed, a young stagehand named Mia approached Elliot. She was barely 20, her hair dyed electric blue, her eyes wide with awe. "That was incredible," she said, her voice shaky. "How did you do that? I mean, after you know what they said." Elliot chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "I've heard worse, kid. You don't get to my age without growing a thick skin." He paused, his gaze distant. "But the music?" That's what keeps you soft. Mia fidgeted, then blurted, I play too. Well, I used to. Guitar, not piano. But I quit when my dad said it was a waste of time. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, embarrassed. Elliot studied her, seeing the same hunger he'd once felt. You still got that guitar? He asked. She nodded. Then play it. Doesn't matter what anyone says. Music's not for them. It's for you. Mia's eyes glistened, and she managed a small smile. Before she could respond, the stage manager called for the next contestant. Elliot tipped his head and shuffled toward the exit, but Mia called after him. Wait, will you come back? For the finals. He turned, his smile wistful. We'll see, kid. We'll see. As he stepped into the cool night air, the weight of the evening settled on him. The applause had been a gift, but it wasn't what he'd come for. He'd played for Clara, for Lily, for the boy he'd been. And maybe, just maybe, for the world that still needed to hear his song. The morning after the talent show, Elliot woke to the sound of his radio crackling with static. His apartment was a small, cluttered space, the walls lined with faded photographs and a single shelf of books, their spines worn from years of rereading. He lay in bed, the ache in his joints a familiar companion, and replayed the previous night in his mind. The jeers, the music, the ovation. It felt like a dream, fragile and fleeting. He rose slowly, his cane a necessity now more than ever. The mirror above his sink showed a face etched with lines, each one a story of its own. He splashed cold water on his cheeks, muttering to himself, You did it, old man. You showed him. But the victory felt hollow, without someone to share it with. Lily, his daughter, hadn't called in months. Their last conversation had been strained, her voice clipped with the exhaustion of a life spent running from one obligation to another. Elliot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He shuffled over, expecting Mrs. Delaney, the neighbor who sometimes brought him soup. Instead, he found Mia, the stagehand from the talent show, clutching a guitar case. Her blue hair was tucked under a beanie, and her eyes were bright with nervous energy. Mr. Hawthorne, hi, she said, shifting her weight. I hope it's okay I came. I got your address from the contestant list. I just your music last night. It did something to me. I haven't stopped thinking about it. Elliot raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to be flattered or wary. You tracked down an old man's address because of a song? He asked, but his tone was gentle, curious. Mia blushed. It's more than that. You made me feel like maybe I could try again. With my guitar. I brought it to show you. She hesitated, then added, and I thought you might need a ride to the finals next week. You're going, right? Elliot hadn't planned on it. The thought of facing another crowd, another round of judgment, made his chest tighten. But Mia's earnestness disarmed him. He invited her in, and soon they were seated at his small kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. Mia strummed a few chords on her guitar, her fingers clumsy but eager. Elliot listened, nodding, and when she faltered, he offered a quiet suggestion. Loosen your grip. Let the strings breathe. For the next hour, they talked music, her dreams of busking in the city, his memories of stolen nights at the church piano. Mia confessed she'd grown up in foster homes, bouncing from one to another, her guitar the only constant. It's like you said, she told him. Music's for me. But sometimes I forget that. Elliot felt a pang, recognizing the loneliness in her voice. He wanted to tell her about Lily, about the ache of a daughter who'd drifted away, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, Keep playing, Mia, even when it hurts. Especially then. The week leading to the finals was a blur. Mia became a regular visitor, bringing energy to Elliot's quiet days. She'd play her guitar, and he'd hum along, sometimes tapping out a rhythm on the table. One afternoon, she convinced him to visit the community center, where a battered, upright piano stood in the rec room. He played a few bars, and a small crowd of retirees gathered, their faces softening with nostalgia. Mia filmed it on her phone, her grin wide. You're a star, Mr. H. But not everyone was charmed. The talent show's organizers, sensing a viral moment, had posted a clip of Elliot's performance online. It spread like wildfire, the headline blaring. 88-year-old pianist shocks talent show judges. Comments flooded in, some praising his courage, others mocking his age, his trembling hands. One particularly cruel post called him a relic trying to steal the spotlight. Elliot didn't see it, but Mia did, and her jaw tightened as she read. Don't let it get to you, she told him. though her voice wavered. They don't know you. Elliot shrugged. Let him talk. Always will. But the attention weighed on him. He hadn't played for fame. He'd played to remember who he was. The night of the finals arrived, and the auditorium was packed. Elliot wore the same frayed suit, his cane tucked under his arm as Mia led him backstage. The other contestants, singers, dancers, a teenage magician buzzed with nervous energy, their youth a stark contrast to Elliot's quiet presence. Mia stayed close, her guitar slung over her shoulder. She'd entered the competition at the last minute, inspired by Elliot, though she hadn't told him. When her name was called, Elliot's eyes widened. You didn't say, he began, but she flashed a nervous grin and hurried onto the stage. Her performance was raw, her voice cracking on the high notes, but there was a fire in her playing that made the crowd lean in. She sang a song she'd written about running, about searching for a place to belong. When she finished, the applause was warm, and Elliot clapped hardest of all, his chest swelling with pride. Then it was his turn. The crowd hushed as he took the stage, the spotlight harsh against his lined face. This time, he chose a piece of his own, a composition he'd written for Clara decades ago, never played for anyone but Lily. The notes were soft at first, like a whisper, then grew bold, a declaration of love that had outlasted death. The audience was spellbound, some swaying, others weeping. Halfway through, a man in the back row stood, clapping before the song was over. Others joined, and soon the room was alive with applause, a wave of gratitude for a man who dared to share his soul. Elliot finished, his hands trembling not from age but from emotion. He stood, leaning on his cane, and bowed. The finals were over, but the night lingered in Elliot's bones. He sat in his apartment, the radio off for once, the silence heavy with the weight of what he'd done. Mia had driven him home, her chatter filling the car with stories of her foster homes, her dreams of music, her hope that she'd made him proud. You did good, kid, he'd told her, and her smile had been brighter than the stage lights. But alone now, Elliot felt the familiar ache of absence. He pulled a photo from the shelf of young Lily, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting on his lap at the old piano. He hadn't heard from her since the talent show's first round. He'd sent her a message about it, a clumsy text typed with trembling fingers, but there'd been no reply. He didn't blame her. Life was busy, and she had her own family now, a world he barely understood. The next morning, Mia arrived with a surprise, a letter from the talent show organizers. Elliot had won second place, a minor miracle given the competition. The prize was Smala $500 check and an invitation to perform at a local charity gala, but the letter praised his timeless artistry and inspiring resilience. Mia read it aloud, her voice bubbling with excitement. You're famous, Mr. H. They're calling you the Piano Man of Maplewood. Elliot chuckled, waving her off. Famous, my foot. I'm just an old man who plays. But her enthusiasm was infectious, and he agreed to the gala, partly to humor her, partly because the spark in his chest was growing brighter. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, all chandeliers and polished floors. Elliot felt out of place among the tuxedos and evening gowns, his suit still frayed but freshly pressed. Mia was there, too, invited as his guest, her guitar case slung over her shoulder like a shield. She'd been practicing a new song, one she hadn't shared with him yet, and her nervous energy was palpable. As they mingled, a woman approached, her face vaguely familiar. She was in her 50s, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp but kind. Mr. Hawthorne, she said, her voice hesitant. I'm Sarah Klein, one of the talent show judges. I owe you an apology. What I said during your first performance was cruel. I didn't know your story. Elliot studied her, his expression unreadable. No harm done, he said finally. You thought I was just an old fool. Plenty do. Sarah shook her head. No, you're extraordinary. I looked you up after the show. You composed for years, didn't you? Without ever sharing it. What? Elliot's gaze drifted to the piano across the room. Didn't need to share it. It was enough to play. But Sarah's question lingered, stirring memories of the songs he'd written, the ones he'd locked away after Clara's death. Maybe it was time to let them breathe. The gala's host called Elliot to the stage, and the crowd hushed. He played another original piece, this one inspired by Lilia Bright, playful melody that darkened with time, mirroring their drifting apart. The room was silent, save for the music, and when he finished, The applause was thunderous. Mia rushed to his side, her eyes shining. "That was for your daughter, wasn't it?" she whispered. Elliot nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, for her." The twist came later that night, as the gala wound down. Sarah Klein approached again, this time with a man in tow, a music producer named Daniel Voss, his suit sharp and his smile sharper. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, "your performance was remarkable. I'd like to record your compositions, maybe even release an album. There's a market for this authentic, soulful music. What do you say?" Elliot blinked, caught off guard. An album? At 88? The idea was absurd, yet it stirred something deep within him. He glanced at Mia, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "Do it, Mr. H. You've got to." But doubt crept in. What if it was a fluke, a moment of pity from a crowd moved by his age? What if his music wasn't good enough? He told Daniel he'd think about it, his voice gruff to hide his uncertainty. As they left the gala, Mia chattered about studios and record deals, but Elliot's thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in memories of Lily, of Clara, of the boy who'd once believed his music could change the world. Back home, he sat at his table, the $500 check untouched. He didn't need the money, not really. What he needed was something he couldn't name, a connection, a purpose, a reason to keep playing. He picked up his phone, hesitating, then typed another message to Lily. "Played at a gala tonight. Thought of you. Love, Dad." He didn't expect a reply, but as he drifted to sleep, the phone buzzed. A single word lit up the screen: proud. Lily's message, proud, was a spark in the dark. Elliot read it again and again, the word glowing on his phone like a lifeline. He hadn't seen his daughter in person in years, their bond stretched thin by distance and unspoken hurts. But that single word was enough to pull him forward, to make him believe he could still reach her. The next day, he called Daniel Voss. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. "The album. But it's got to be my music, my way." Daniel agreed, and within a week, Elliot was in a small recording studio, the air thick with the scent of coffee and electronics. Mia was there, too, her guitar case at her side, her role shifting from fan to unofficial assistant. She'd taken to organizing his sheet music, yellowed pages he'd dug out of storage, filled with compositions from decades past. The recording process was grueling. Elliot's hands ached after hours at the piano, and the producer's suggestions sometimes clashed with his vision. But the music flowed, each piece a fragment of his life. A lullaby for Lily, a lament for Clara, a defiant anthem for the boy who'd never given up. Mia watched, transfixed, sometimes strumming along softly, her own music growing bolder with each session. One afternoon, as they took a break, Daniel played back a rough mix of Elliot's first track. The notes filled the studio, crisp and alive, and Elliot closed his eyes, transported back to the church piano, to the nights when music was his only refuge. Mia wiped her eyes, and even Daniel, usually all business, nodded in quiet respect. "This is special, Elliot," he said. "This is going to touch people." Word of the album spread. Local news picked up the story, dubbing Elliot the Piano Man of Maplewood, a nickname Mia loved to tease him with. The community center became a hub of activity, with retirees stopping by to congratulate him, some bringing their grandchildren to hear him play. One evening, Mia organized an impromptu concert there, and the room was packed. Old friends, new fans, even Sarah Klein, who'd become an unlikely ally, promoting his music on her social media. But the real surprise came during the concert. As Elliot played a new piece, a figure slipped into the back of the room, unnoticed by most. It was Lily. She stood quietly, her coat dusted with snow, her face a mix of pride and guilt. When Elliot finished, the crowd erupted, but his eyes found hers. For a moment, time stopped. She approached as he stepped off the stage, her steps hesitant. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I saw the videos, heard your music. I didn't know you were still playing." Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to ask why she'd pulled away, why the years had built a wall between them, but instead he opened his arms. She fell into them, and they held each other, the music still echoing in the air. Mia watched from the side, her grin wide, tears streaking her face. Lily stayed for days, filling Elliot's apartment with stories of her life, her job, her kids, her struggles. She listened as he spoke of Clara, of the piano, of the talent show that had changed everything. I thought you'd given up on music, she admitted. I thought it hurt you too much. It did, Elliot said. But it saved me, too. The album, titled 88 Keys, was released to quiet but growing acclaim. It wasn't a chart topper, but it found its audience, people who heard their own joys and sorrows in Elliot's melodies. Letters arrived, some from strangers, others from old friends, thanking him for reminding them to keep going, to hold on to what mattered. Mia's music flourished, too. She started busking downtown, her guitar case filling with coins and her confidence growing with each note. Elliot and Lily rebuilt their bond slowly, through phone calls and visits, each conversation a step toward healing. The talent show, once a fleeting moment, had become a turning point, a reminder that it was never too late to share your song. Elliot played now not just for himself, but for Clara, for Lily, for Mia, for the world that still listened. As winter settled over Maplewood, Elliot sat at the community center's piano, playing for a small crowd of children and their parents. His hands were slower now, the ache deeper, but the music was as alive as ever. Mia stood nearby, strumming her guitar, her voice blending with his melody in a duet they'd written together. The notes rose, a promise of hope, a testament to resilience. And somewhere, in the spaces between the keys, Elliot heard Clara's laugh, Lily's pride, and the boy he'd been, still dreaming.